64K. Where the future is so bright you gotta wear shades.
Thanks for joining, and in this series I'm going to be jumping back and forth between new and old, chronicling the entire Sega Ages series and its spin-offs. If you like Sega and retro, then welcome to Sega Ages, Then and Now. So today's games are the Phantasy Star Collection on the Sega Saturn and Phantasy Star on the Nintendo Switch. So let's first take a brief look at the Phantasy Star series as a whole, which made its original debut in 1987 on the Sega Master System. It was Sega's response to the massive popularity of JRPGs at the time, like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, and was a combination of high fantasy and sci-fi styled aesthetics. The first 4 games, which spanned the Master System and Mega Drive, all took place in the Elgo Star System, with the planets Palma, Motavia, and Desolus all featuring in various degrees in those games. They all featured overhead exploration and traditional RPG mechanics, as well as turn-based combat featuring a combination of magic and technology. Each game also features a new set of characters, but an overall plot, at least in the first 4, is present and fully wrapped up by the 4th game. The original series started in 1987 and ended in 1993, but would later be revived with the brilliant Phantasy Star Online in 2000, which was a groundbreaking online RPG on the Sega Dreamcast. The series has had a bunch of spin-offs since then, but a lot of those games never left Japan. In 2019, we finally got a big Phantasy Star announcement in the form of Phantasy Star Online 2 coming to the Xbox One in 2020. So at least for English fans, this is a return of the series in a big way. Now it's time to jump back to the then and take a look at our first Ages game for today. The Phantasy Star Collection was released in 1998 for the Sega Saturn in Japan, and was part of the original Sega Ages series that debuted a year earlier. It's a compilation of the first 4 games in the series, and the games are exact ports of the original versions with some extras. So speaking of extras, let's jump over and check those out first. You got an art gallery containing 215 pictures from all 4 games. You got a collection of Japanese TV commercials for all the games. These are absolutely awesome. I wish modern video game adverts were as cool as these ones. The games also feature arranged soundtrack options and can be displayed in hiragana or katakana. If you know anything about Japanese language and are learning Japanese language, then this is a major plus to the games. It simply makes it much easier to read and understand if you're learning Japanese. You can also adjust the speed of the games and the difficulty. Okay, let's jump on over and take a brief look at all 4 games. 1987's Phantasy Star was an impressive RPG for the time, as it featured not only overhead and first-person turn-based combat, but also this really impressive 3D dungeon effect used when exploring caves and old temples. The effect was pulled off by programmer and later designer Yuji Naka, who would later go on to heading up Sonic Team, and not only creating Sonic the Hedgehog, but also the epic Phantasy Star Online. The game has you trying to get revenge for your brother, who was brutally murdered in front of you by Lasek, the all-powerful evil dictator of the star system. It's a really good RPG ROM filled with random encounters, multiple party members joining the quest, and 3 planets to explore. The only downside to this game for me is the quests are pretty vague, especially later on, so a lot of time gets wasted on not knowing exactly where you need to go. It doesn't ruin the game at all, it's just simply a product of its age. Next is 1989's Phantasy Star 2, which debuted on Sega's new console at the time, the Mega Drive, and was out the following year on the Sega Genesis. I played this to death in the early 90s and managed to complete it, and it's still one of my favorite in the original series. The game takes place 1,000 years after the events of the original, and takes place initially on Motavia, where you have to go and investigate why the supercomputer that runs the planet and keeps everything in check has stopped functioning. A lot of really great characters in this one, and the turn-based combat is more refined with the ability to see your party members now, multiple planets to explore, and a good story with a great soundtrack and addictive combat make it an excellent choice if you wanted to try out the Phantasy Star universe for the first time. And our third game is Phantasy Star 3 Generations of Doom, released in 1991. This one is kind of the odd game out in this original series, only in the fact that its ties to the others is not that obvious until much later. All the tropes of the previous 2 are here in all their glory. Multiple party members, turn-based combat, with the major and very unique difference that the game takes place over centuries, so marrying and having kids becomes your next hero with multiple endings coming into play. I've honestly never played this one for an extended amount of time, and it always comes across as an extremely intriguing game. A bit different from the first two, but one that I think is still worth playing. And the final game here is Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium, which was released in 1993 in Japan and 1995 in North America and Europe. They definitely saved the best for last in terms of size, graphics, and music. This game is fantastic, with an excellent story and characters to boot. The gameplay style is the same as part 2, just refined on many levels, and the excellent manga-style comic book story elements really help sell the story much more dramatically. Plot relates a lot back to Phantasy Star 2, where the planet of Motavia is returning to its natural environmental state after the ending of the supercomputer, and you're a hunter trying to cull the local monster population to keep some sort of order to the people still living there. So much time spent playing this back in the day, and it's a game I'd love to revisit one day for another playthrough. A fantastic compilation overall. It's a pity it never got an English release, but thankfully all these games are available on multiple Sega compilations seen here that have been released over the years, so playing them in English on modern systems is easy to come by. Now let's jump to the now and check out the 2018 Sega Ages release of the original Phantasy Star on the Nintendo Switch. So we're not going to look at the plot as it's still exactly the same as before, but M2 have done a marvelous re-release here, really taking all the detail and making this a fantastic presentation of a classic RPG for modern gamers. The game is still as bright and colourful as it ever was, and sports a bunch of pixel and screen sizes so you can play it the way you like visually. They've also included the excellent Japanese FM soundtrack that was only available in the Japanese version, making the music sound way better, and is an option I'd honestly suggest you use, as the music is pretty good overall. Other tweaks like being able to adjust the difficulty somewhat, for example less random encounters, is really nice, and a glossary that you can jump to at any time to see what an object or weapon's main functions or stats are is very useful. The biggest improvement though, as you can probably see from the video, is the inclusion of an auto map feature for the dungeons, which honestly improves this game significantly and makes those maze-like labyrinths so much better to navigate. I originally played the Game Boy Advance version of this game in the early 2000s and got pretty damn far, but ended up lost in a dungeon pretty far into the game and never managed to finish it, and I really regret that. But now it's just a lot more accessible to anybody. All this, bear in mind, does not make this game a walk in the park. It's still a challenge, especially initially, until you level up a bit and get Mao, Odin and Noah onto your team. Then things are a lot easier. So as I said earlier with the Saturn version, the quests are still a little bit vague, so a lot of trial and error and exploring is required to find items or people, which may not be to everybody's liking, but for me, the fact that you have 3 massive planets to explore, plus the addictiveness of the turn-based combat, make it something I'm willing to tolerate in the grand scheme of the adventure. Sega and M2 have really nailed this re-release upgrade, and this is the kind of care and dedication that is greatly appreciated by fans, and I'm really looking forward to more jumps into the new era of the Ages series. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.